and
And it did.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education to order. And note that we are meeting with remote participation. In-house are Mrs. Boyette, Mr. Breen, Mr. Mercer, and myself, Dr. Fitch. And meeting with us remotely are Mrs. Barnes, Mr. Farmer, and Mrs. Powell. Now that we have established that information, I will ask for an approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell,
I move that we approve the agenda for the October 12th special meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education.
Second.
it has been moved by Mrs. Powell, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we approve the special meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education for Monday, October 12th, 2020. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please record your vote. Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
And myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Members of the board, under the chairman's remarks or comments, I have just a couple of points to make. First being, in our remote participation in a board meeting, policy number 2302, item number 4 indicates that no board member may participate remotely more than 3 times during a calendar year. However, in justifiable circumstances, the board may, by 2/3 vote, agree to waive this limitation. Can we look at that particular component? And it further goes on to indicate that for stay-at-home orders or quarantine or isolation in the electronic board meeting section in D. But can we, because right now we are actually in violation of our own policy, because we have been in remote meeting since March when we approved this policy, and we are now in October, and we do have board members who, for health reasons, are they're not quarantined, but they are meeting remotely because of health issues and the conflicts with the COVID-19 situation. So can we have a generalized and maybe remove the stipulation of the meetings? I think it was there to make sure that we did not abuse the capability of meeting remotely, but because of health concerns and the circumstances, we may need to, and without having to go into take a 2/3 vote every time, that we get past that magic 3 number.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm happy to do that. Would you like it to say, just for the state of emergencies purposes, that you all have flexibility, and that when they're not in a state of emergency, that you all would prefer to not have more than 3 remote?
Yes,
Soft
something like that, to a prefer and not.
Okay.
Okay, so if we can address that and bring that back,
Okay.
I guess that revised policy would be a first read.
Yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
would it be possible that we could take a vote that would be for the duration of the need as we have it In other words, not vote every meeting we have.
Well, that's what I'm asking her to put in to make a change in the language
So we
that would
can,
not.
if need be, we can have one vote and it lasts for,
Well,
like a pandemic is something that's not here one meeting and go on the next.
well, we do have the electronic board meeting statement on the third page of that policy that talks about quarantine, stay-at-home orders and the like. But I just wanted to kind of remove that set number that was there, if there could be a way around that. And you said we prefer, so I will let Board Attorney craft whatever and bring that back to us if that is okay with the board.
That's- I'm not opposed to that. I just didn't know if there was something that we could do quickly and have it done.
Mrs. Cornetta?
Just addressing Mr. Mercer's point, I'm glad to make it so that you don't have to vote except to adopt the policy, and then if there's anything that goes outside the four corners of the policy, you can revisit it. But I'd like to give you all some breathing room in that policy itself so that you're not voting every meeting.
Okay.
That's fine. isn't it?
Mr. Breen and Mrs. Boyette, you're here face-to-face. Do you have any issues with my request to Board Attorney in relation to this policy?
No objection.
Mrs. Boyette, now I'll ask Mr. Farmer, Mrs. Powell, and Mrs. Barnes if you are in agreement with having this policy revisited as I have requested.
Yes, I'm in agreement to have it revisited.
All right?
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you so very much. The second point of my chairman's comment is that during this pandemic, we have changed our board meeting to a 4 o'clock meeting. We have been primarily in isolation, except with the last couple of meetings when other board members have chosen to enter the building to be participants. And comment has been made to me about our meeting times. So I would like for you to consider whether or not we're going to continue to meet at 4 o'clock, whether or not, because our board meeting policy just does not give a time anymore. It states at a stated time to be published. Do you want to go back to a 7:30 meeting, or would some other time work, such as 5:30 or 6 o'clock, which would move our time back? It would keep us from being as late, and as time changes in the next couple of weeks and darkness descends upon us at a much earlier rate. And also to consider whether or not we want to continue to have committee meetings, which would require a separate meeting, or if you want to move us to just the full board, as we have been doing during this pandemic time. So if we could get just a little bit of feedback and we can work at that, or we can discuss it at the next meeting to give you a little bit of time to think about whether or not we want to continue at 4 o'clock. We know that some people in the public, since we are live streaming, may not have the opportunity because of work commitments to view us at 4 o'clock. But if we move to a 5:30 or 6 o'clock, it would allow possible more capability of catching the live stream. So if you want to respond at this time, we can, but we can put it on the agenda for the regular board meeting for consideration of changes of those particular entities that were mentioned.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
the time, I can accommodate whatever time best serves the board and the community. But the committee meetings, and I've appreciated and I think we've benefited from those, but during the pandemic and restrictions, I think we're serving ourselves and all concerned better by doing as we've been doing, meeting with the full board, as opposed to coming and going
Okay.
so much.
Well, we've heard Mr. Mercer's comments. We will ask you to think about it, and we'll have that on the discussion for on the agenda for discussion at the next board meeting, and you can weigh in at that time. My third comment deals with our policy revisions. Members of the board, you have asked, are we about done? You know, it's been almost like the little kid saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Members of the board, we are there. This last bulk package of policies gets us through our policy review. There are 2 more major policies that we have not reviewed yet according to legal counsel, but they will come at the January board meeting, and any other discussions and changes of policy will be an ongoing process, so that we hopefully don't find ourselves having to review the entire policy manual. Now, if it comes to that later down the road, have at it, because I know that I hope that I don't have to be involved in another mass wholesale policy revision. But when we take a long time to get back to this, this is what is entailed. So you have lived through the revision of the Wilson County Schools Policy Manual. I thank you, I thank you, I thank you for your attention. We do have a full slate of 27 items today that we will be reviewing. And let me thank, I was going to do it on the back end, but let me do it on the front end. Let me thank Mrs. Cornetta from the legal counsel for all of the input and diligence, to Mrs. Hooper for all of the typing and retyping and everything else involved with the reds and the blues and the strike-throughs. Thank you for Dr. Wilson and other staff, Dr. Mills, and everybody who has had an input in the revisions that have occurred to the policy, for having the patience when we as a board have had discussions and said, can you change? Can you redo? Can you add? Can you detract? We thank each of the board members for your attention at the details of the policies that lead our system. And so as we get ready to move into this last 27, again, on behalf of the board, I thank you for your due diligence. That concludes.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell?
I just have one comment. Free
Yes.
at last, free at last. Thank God. We're almost free at last.
I'm glad you added almost, so that we can get through these
And
27.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
I hope someone, if we have to do this again at this level, since Mr. Farmer has experience, I'd like to get him maybe to come in as a consultant and work with us at each meeting.
Consultant, I want to be the chairman.
Well, sir, since you absented yourself from even being considered for re-election, that's not a possibility unless you run again at a later point when they're looking to do this, and maybe that will happen. Thank
Well,
you.
should somebody die, I volunteer to come back.
According to our policy, it could only be if that person is from the district that you currently represent, or if you're in that configuration. Otherwise, the replacing party comes from the district of the person that we are not claiming to be deceased.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. All right. Now, let's move into our discussion information items. Item A under that are policies to be repealed. You had within your packet a list of policies being repealed. There are 13 of those, beginning with policy 1511, policy draft writer, policy 3022, hiring procedure, policy 3024, 4024, participation in inmate work release program, policy 3200, initial assignment, 3500, temporary assignments, 3512, summer teaching assignments, 3700, $4,600 salary, 3720, 4063 attorney consultation with employees. Policy 3901/4801 JTPA non-discrimination and grievance policy. 5033 classroom interruptions. 6010 compulsory attendance age. 6112 homebound students, and 6911 control of lice and nits. Each of those policies is in your packet, and the request is that these policies be repealed due to the fact that other policies have replaced them. What is your pleasure?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Barnes?
I move that we approve the removal of the aforementioned policies as listed in our précis.
So,
It has been moved by Mrs. Barnes and seconded by Mr. Mercer that we repeal the aforementioned policies that you have in your board packet and whose names have already been itemized to you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please state your vote. Mrs. Boyette?
Aye.
Mr. Breen?
Aye.
Mr. Farmer?
Aye.
Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Powell?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
And myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And now we are at the proposed draft revised policy and administrative regulations. As I stated earlier, there are 27 items for our consideration today. 12 of those are administrative regulations, 12 are revised policies, and 3 are draft policies. We're going to begin with Administrative Regulation 1320/3560R, Title I, Consultation with Private School Officials. Members of the board, this is now open for discussion. Each of these policies are a first read and will come back to us at our regular meeting for second read of those policies.
Dr. Fitch, if I can interrupt just for a second. This
Yes.
is a regulation. You all have already passed the 1320 policy. So
Yes.
it's my understanding that it does not come back for board action.
Oh, okay, all right.
Just to clarify, not that you all can't have input, the purpose of bringing it before you is to have that input, but you all have delegated the authority to your superintendent to prepare regulations consistent with your board.
So is that the case for each of the regulations that is coming before us?
Yes,
It is coming before us for information and not for action,
that's correct.
all right? So board members, please note that those 12 administrative regulations, in essence, are coming to us for input, but this first read is the only read,
Yes, ma'am.
because that is information only, unless we are asking them to go back with
Correct.
some clarification.
That's correct. You would have input and they may want to revise, but you all don't need to act.
Okay. So the 12 administrative regulations are strictly for our information. The 12 revised policies are first reads and would require a second read for approval. And the 3 drafts, again, would be a first read with coming before us as a second read.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for approval or the like, okay. I'd like to begin with line 31. When are these invitations sent? Are they sent at the very beginning of the school year? And I thought as I read through the policy that there may have been, I may have answered my own question, but do those invitations go at the beginning of the academic year? Unless a school is not on one of the 2 lists that was listed? Is that how that goes?
Ms. May is also on the call.
Ms. May, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Dr. Fitch?
Doing well, thank you. Did you hear the question that I was attempting to get clarification on?
Yes, ma'am. So those invitations to consult go out in April of each year. Sometimes we get those out even a little bit earlier, but by April at the latest.
Okay. Is
So
that,
we sent the invitation, so for example, I sent the invitations out last March to consult for the 2021 school year. Because those decisions, whether private schools are going to opt in for federal funds, have to be made early in the spring prior to us planning our federal budget.
okay, all right, that answers that question. The other question I had, do the students, by receiving services from us, count in our student numbers or not?
No, ma'am. So we currently do not have any private schools that have opted in for Title I funds. But if they did, those students would not count towards enrollment for us. We would simply provide funding for those students, for services for those students, based on low-income data, poverty data from those private schools.
And those funds for services come strictly from the federal government or from Fed and state?
They are strictly from the federal government, and so if private schools opted in, then the funding that they would receive would come off the top of our allotment for the year.
I have a question, Dr. Fitch.
Mrs. Barnes?
May. And the question would be, just as they talked about sending funds directly to charter schools, has any mention been made of sending Title I funds directly to a private school upon their request rather than having to go through the public school system?
No, ma'am, I have not heard any discussion of that. I think the current requirement is that federal funds for private schools have to flow through the LEA.
Okay.
And if a school did opt in for Title I funding, the money would always stay with the district. So it's not like a private school actually receives the funding. Their purchases, or if they, say for instance, if they opted in and they decided to offer after-school tutoring for their students, then that would all flow through our finance department. It's all managed and overseen by the LEA.
All right, that's what I was hoping to hear. Thank you.
We're responsible for the bookkeeping and the documentation for all those funds as they're allotted and part of the audit that they would do for Title I programs.
It would be nice if they could apply for their own funds and not have to end up taking funds away from us to divert.
If they do, they'd have to comply with the other rules and guidelines that we have to comply with. At this point, it's a courtesy in the legislation for them to be offered a portion of funds. They also are allowed to participate in PD offerings that are used, Title I funds are used for, and things like that if they choose to. So it's not always just money, it could be indirect.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Hearing none, we're going to move to revised policy 1510/4200/7270, school safety. Please note that the original strike-through that you find gets moved, relocated when you are on page, starting on the second page of the policy, under responding to student altercations and other threats to safety. If I'm not mistaken, it got moved to paragraph 5, which can be found on, beginning at line 113.
That's correct.
Okay, and then there were just a couple of points added into that particular policy. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, issues? Hearing none, we're going to move to revised policy 1730, 7231. You will find at line 22, there is a reference to a policy, once we are done, that will be renumbered in the scheme that we're presenting, and it will be discrimination and harassment prohibited by federal law, that particular policy. And then they've made the actual acts and all legal references at the back. Is there any discussion, questions, issues, concerns? Hearing none, let's move to draft policy 2127, board member technology use. Do you have any questions? Comments, concerns, issues, discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Breen?
I would just say, not that it matters, because they're all guidelines, but I am staunchly opposed to any kind of limitation on a private citizen's ability to exercise their First Amendment rights, even on social media. I'm not a fan of Section C
Section C?
at all, but since it has no teeth, I don't particularly object to it. I can't think of any other elected body that has a provision in its own rules governing its own use of social media. I'm not sure why we're doing it. I understand the need to follow the guidelines so as not to violate the privacy interests of our students and our employees. But I think there's some vague language in there that I'm not necessarily a fan of, but like I said, the policy itself has no teeth. So I'm not too terribly worried about it.
All right. Ms. Cornetta?
Just to reiterate Mr. Breen's comments, regulating board member conduct on social media has been probably the most difficult thing to rein in, train, navigate, and not violate limitation of First Amendment rights. As board elected officials, you have a role model standard to live by, and if you all promulgate rules for your students and teachers as to how to properly use social media, it's always a good idea to walk the walk. To Mr. Green's point, the legal defensibility of it is, it's recommended to have a policy rather than not. There are Fourth Circuit case decisions that turn on the fact that the absence of a policy created confusion and abuse of opinions that were negatively implicated on the board in that case. So I understand exactly where Mr. Breen is coming from. It would be my recommendation that the policy be adopted as presented. If you all feel like you want to scale it back, we can do that. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Ms. Cornetta? There was another policy that talked about technology, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look and see.
I think it's 7. The staff.
There was one for staff, if I'm not mistaken. I think we all...
7320, Dr. Lynch, and 3225/4312.
Right.
7320.
You know, I don't think we're trying to regulate anybody's first, or step on anybody's First Amendment rights, but I think we all know that we are held to a slightly different standard being elected. And I know through the years we have come to realize that as the technology changes, it affects all of us, even down, we regulate our students as well. So when I read it, I had no problem with it, and I see Mr. Breen's point. But in order to be fair and consistent across the board, I think we have to include ourselves in some of the regulations that get passed. So, but it is totally up to the board if you want to scale back, leave alone, or do whatever. So this is the point for discussion. And Mr. Breen has shared his concerns. Are there other concerns, issues, questions, comments, or discussion? Thank you very much. We'll now move to revised policy 2300, board meetings. There is one paragraph that has been added. And do you have any questions, issues, comments, concerns in regard to this revised policy?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
I have none regarding the substance, but on line 12, the beginning of the sentence, I think a D between while and go
Correct.
is,
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
yes, ma'am.
We're asked that you insert the word the at the beginning on line 12, while the goal of the board is to operate. Any other points to be made? Hearing none. Moving on to draft policy 3103, alternative degree completion. Any comments, questions, issues, concerns? Hearing none. We'll then look at the administrative regulation for 3103 and ask if you have any comments, issues, questions, concerns.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell.
on line 4, where it says dropouts or students claiming special needs desire release from Wilson County Schools for enrollment in community college shall adhere to the following steps. I have a problem with the word claiming. And I didn't know there was a reason why that's there, because most of the times our students with special needs, there's evidence proving that they are identified as a child with special needs. The claiming is kind of like without evidence or proof, or just saying they are. So I just need some clarification on that word claiming.
Would with special needs be,
That would be better, students with special needs. Instead of,
okay, Mrs. Cornetta and Dr. Wilson are having a discussion at this point. If you'll hold for just a minute.
okay.
Dr. Wilson, will you share?
Ms. Powell, what we were thinking in this administrative reg is that the term special needs a lot of times is used in the exceptional children's program, but in this particular administrative reg, it would be a student with special needs, such as a student who's claiming some kind of special need to exit school, not necessarily limited to their cognitive or physical ability.
So maybe needs should be circumstances?
Maybe that would be a better word than, because it's not intended for students who are in the exceptional children in the special needs program.
So would it be better dropouts or students with, no, I just lost the phraseology. Not special needs, but special circumstances or considerations who desire release from Wilson County Schools? Would that be better, an acceptable change?
Yeah, that sounds better, because when I think of who is special need, I think of the students with identified as, but claiming, maybe with special conditions or special,
Well, if we leave out the word claiming and put dropouts or students with special considerations or circumstances who desire release from Wilson County Schools. Is that acceptable?
that sounds better to me. It really does. Special considerations.
I just think circumstances are a larger umbrella than just
Yes.
saying.
Yes,
this.
that's a good point. I think that definitely that would work there.
Okay.
Other points to be made? All right. Then let's move on to Administrative Regulation 3103E1, Wilson County Schools Authorization to Test. Comments, questions, issues, concerns? And hearing none, move to Administrative Regulation 3103E2, Community College Release Form. Questions, comments, issues, concerns, discussion. Hearing none, let's move to Administrative Regulation 3103E3, Community College Release Checklist. Comments, questions, issues, concerns, discussion.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Boyer?
I'd just like to say how useful it is to have all of these procedures and everything specified and lined up and the forms attached. It makes the process
A
so
lot
much
easier.
easier to
Yes.
follow and to give direction to. But thank you.
Now you can just hand out a packet to the person who is requesting, and it's all there in one fell swoop.
And which form it is and which part, and, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Moving forward, you all got really energized because you're moving right well.
Well, we got experience.
I guess. Revised policy 3200, selection of educational resources. And I think we had some inserts here, beginning at line 84, resources brought in by teachers, and going through line 131. Any comments, concerns, issues, discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Velma Barnes.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
particularly like this policy because in the community, there's been a lot of discussion about giving resources. What are the resources? And this helped to do some explanations of what some of our selected resources are.
All right. Any other discussion points? Mr. Mercer?
I have a question.
Yes.
When I visit a school, visit a class, am I a guest speaker? Because,
Are you controversial?
no, well, I try not to be. I can't say with certainty, but I try not to be.
Okay.
I mean, because, I mean, it's much like Jones that has the, when they have community people go out and read, we have a whole bunch of people, I would suspect that that doesn't fall under this if they're invited and so forth. Does it or doesn't?
That would fall under 3A without review.
All I hope I don't get reviewed.
Depending on what material you're reading, I suppose.
And usually when they ask you to come and read, they'll have the
Provide
books
the material.
available for you without you bringing in the book of your choice. Okay. Other comments, issues, concerns? Hearing none, let's move to Administrative Regulation 3220R, Technology in the Educational Program. Any comments, questions, issues, concerns, or discussion?
Are we gonna add BYOT to our list of acronyms? That's a joke, please don't do that.
There is an extra space on line 6 between technology and related.
All right. You just wanted that question rhetorical, Mr. Breen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Take lead to update our list.
All right.
You need to stop.
Related to,
Hearing nothing else, let's move on to Administrative Regulation 3225/4312/7320 E1 Student Acceptable Use Agreement. Any comments, questions, issues, concerns, discussion? Okay, let's move on to Administrative Regulation 3225/4312/7320 E2 Employee Acceptable Use Agreement. All right, hearing none, but a facetious comment now. You mean we don't have an acceptable use agreement for the board? Being facetious,
It's just one piece of
rhetorical.
paper that says we do what we want.
Okay. All right.
Y'all need to keep moving. Y'all need to keep moving.
I'm moving on to Administrative Regulation 3226/4205, Internet Safety.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
on line 93,
I'm sorry for those who are not able to, who are streaming, that's Mrs. Boyette being recognized. Yes, ma'am.
where it says student instruction, and it says the school media coordinator or school digital teaching and learning specialist shall provide age-appropriate instructions about internet services. My question is, when does this occur? Is that when they come and pick up their devices, or when does that occur? For example, this year,
Mr. Matthew Mayo is online.
Mr. Mayo, if you're with us, if you will unmute, and if you heard the question, or if you need the question repeated, please let us know.
I can answer that then.
Okay.
I was going to give him the chance. So I know that the media coordinators and our new position, the digital teaching and learning specialist positions, they have been creating the lessons. I'm not sure if they had gotten to that part, and they're pacing along the way, but certainly that is a part of their lessons that they would be providing. Whether the teachers, some of the classrooms and some of the schools are on the wheel, and the students are circling into the classroom on a regular basis, and then some of the classrooms at some of the schools are not. And so then those teachers would have to sign up for that.
My question is related to, if you look at the items under it about acceptable use, safety, security, cyberbullying, prohibited activities such as hacking, it would appear to me that the unauthorized disclosure, compliance with technology protection measures, it appears to me that those items that are contained in that training are part of what the student must sign in the acceptable use.
Yes.
So it would appear to me that the instruction would need to go along
hand.
with the acceptable use signing was the
I got you.
reason for my question.
I got you.
The timing of it.
Uh-huh. You're signing that you're gonna follow it when, in effect,
You don't know what you're not
you don't know
following.
what you're signing.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about elementary or middle school, and at high school level, might not understand the severity of.
So are you asking that the policy,
This is a
the
reg-
regulate,
reg.
that the reg, I mean, that the regulation state that at the time of issuance of the devices, that they be made aware, or?
I'm asking that this instruction and the signing of the acceptable use.
Go hand in
be-
hand?
Yes.
Okay.
So we need to put a statement in there, something about the timing of it, so
Yeah.
it's part of that conversation.
Yeah, I certainly understand what you're saying, because we as adults would not necessarily want to sign something that we've not reviewed. So that makes total sense. I know that this passed early on, and when we got into ClassLink, they had to sign something. That was their acceptable use when they logged into ClassLink. But when they logged in, they didn't have all of these policies in front of them. So we'll
Right.
just have to work on the
Yeah,
timing.
working around it, just make sure everybody knows what they are signing up for and what that means when you say you can't do it.
Yes.
Any other comments or concerns, issues?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
on the first page, line 34,
Yes?
that paragraph, in reading it, if I understand what it said was that when someone requests that a website be unblocked, if it's approved, it said you would immediately notify the person making the request. It didn't mention notifying them. On the next paragraph, next page, it says what to do if it's denied the process. And I was thinking that, although I know it would happen, we need to say that the requester would be notified immediately of the decision.
So whether it's approved or
If
denied?
approved or not, let them know
Okay.
as soon as the decision is made. And then then say if approved, what they do, and then the next one says if denied, what they do. Did I read it wrong, or? I mean, I know that's what would probably happen anyway, but.
I think we could add to number 2, line 32, an additional sentence that says that the requester will be informed by the Director of Technology after deciding. We'll put a 3-day turnaround time on it for decision, but it doesn't say notify the requester. So I think we just add a sentence that says the requester shall be notified
And,
within 3 days.
I mean, I just wanted to point it out so that,
Yeah, definitely.
there'd be some guy, also on line 36, it's, Director of Technology at the beginning of that line.
Yeah.
I think it should be anyway.
It should be.
be.
I wrote it down.
I thought your area was math, Mr. Mercer. And here you become the English teacher.
Well, it is, that's where I got the 34 and the 36 was my math
I
training.
know, okay. All right, any other questions, comments, issues, concerns regarding this administrative regulation? Hearing none, let's move on to Administrative Regulation 3227/7322, Web Page Development. I did have a question on line 57. By August 1st, 2020, we've already passed that, so do we have to have a date certain in there? All existing web content produced by Wilson County Schools and new, updated, and existing web content provided by third-party developers will conform to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 Level AA conformance or updated equivalents by August 1st, 2020. If those updates are occurring, do you have to have a date certain in there? Because we certainly have passed August the 1st, 2020. And that, by doing that and you giving that particular date, it would seem as though any other updates would be precluded. So if we take out that date, you're still asking them to be in compliance with whatever updates are there?
Would it help to say August annually?
That might
I need
work.
to go back and read that document.
Okay.
I don't,
Yeah, we'll clarify.
Whether it's annually or whatever. And this is just giving you the input since we won't be seeing this one again, as it's an administrative regulation, but just to make certain that you're not limiting it to that time, whether you do it annually or however often.
We need a S in there too. 55.
Any other comments, questions, issues, concerns, or discussion? Hearing none, let's move forward to Administrative Regulation 4270/6145 R2, return to educational activities following concussion. I'd like to look at line 27. Sleep disruptions can include sleeping more than usual, less than usual, and difficulty following asleep. Can we put a slash or? Okay, I think that there are options. It can be one or a combination. So if we add that slash or, it would be more inclusive. I think when we were talking about the athletics portion of, and policy for concussion, the question was raised by one of the board members as to that return to learning situation, and this certainly includes that and is not limiting this concussion issue to athletes. Any other issues, questions, discussion, concerns in regard to this regulation? Hearing none, let's move forward to revised policy 4700, student records. And I think the only change in that was to add that the student can get one free high school transcript upon completion of coursework or graduation.
There was also a change on line 296 and 97,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
because I had a question about that one.
296 and 97. Yes, video images, of students engaged in officially recognized activities in sports, and then you changed numbers. Mr. Mercer, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. When I read this, I said, yeah, which I think it's good to include stuff like that, but if somebody requested all of it and they were an athlete 4 years in multiple sports, videos of the activities in sports could be a big stack. I mean, if you literally included it all. If you videoed a game, then you have to include a video of the game. Or I know I'm taking it to an extreme, but I'm looking at what it says and what somebody is out, to request. I mean, am I?
So two things, a student may opt out of this provision and then you can't disclose any of the images in which they provide. And then if somebody does ask, then we would have to provide it. I would just wonder, are we retaining all of these videos? And if so, that's fine. We just need to be prepared to provide them if we're calling them directory information and we don't have an opt-out from a student. We do have to provide
I mean,
the clips, but if they're out on the, I don't know where they're stored.
I would hope that no one would really request that, but
Right.
it doesn't take but one person to create a lot of work and inconvenience for somebody.
It'll be stored all over the place right
Right.
now.
Okay.
This was in regards to the camera system that would be global to the ball fields
Okay.
to be in compliance. So it would be in one unitary location, but once you put that line in as worded, it would open you up to
Right.
any district stored events, which could be, video phones or something like that. School phones would cover it, but
So what was the intent in adding the video images, the item 6?
Because the volume of these items, to not have to get individual consent from each and every one of the athletes in order to produce this, by calling it directory information, it's accessible to,
when you put the Pixelot system in, you had a discussion about, so when you put that
Yes.
system in, those images would now be available to show but it was not in our records and directory information, so it's the outcome of that to try and address that.
So isn't the purpose to allow us to use that? That's the purpose.
Yes.
It's not so that someone can then use this to request all the video. Aren't they, they're not congruent?
No.
Okay.
and just to clarify, so if there's a public records request for, or if there's a directory information request for videos of all of your athletes, then you would have to turn over all the video for all the students who haven't opted out of not releasing directory information. Some students can write to you all
Well,
and opt out. If they've opted out, you can't turn over their video images, but everyone else is considered.
Right, that's the drawback.
Well, that was my thinking part of it was, first of all, it would be a mighty big stack of information, but at the same time, I don't think you could hardly release a student in a group unless everybody in the group had been requested and approved.
That's the other issue, is that if students appear who have not opted out and students appear in that same video who have opted out, you'd have to blur out the students who have opted out and not be able to turn over the video unless you've done that. But I think we should look at where the videos are stored and who has access to them, and if they're uploaded, for example, in a public domain like YouTube, I don't think you're gonna get requests. I think you're gonna have people go to,
But if they're uploaded to a public domain, then
Right.
it's not about a matter of request, it's a matter about permission to
Right.
upload to start with.
right.
So it needs to be
I think this
more
helps.
granular in terms of the addition of this to the directory information.
I think inserting this helps staff to not have to go after every single athlete and say, do we have your permission to turn over these?
Well, the main reason I've asked the question was I wanted us to have the discussion now, because if that one person does ask and we don't provide it, then it appears to be targeted at them and not the students or privacy or any of those things. So, whatever administration should be in and the board decides, fine with me.
Well, if with the Pixelot issue, it's gonna be live streamed. That's what the Pixelot whole thing was about. Are they going to store the information? I mean, I know that we're getting the cameras and all, but are they gonna be storing anywhere? And can students then, athletes particularly, then be informed that, and have a sign-in form, or a release or a non-release form at the point when they get made a part of the team, so that they know automatically and you don't have to worry about the blur outs and whatever, that just becomes part of their being on the team?
If those videos, if they were saved, would they be our property, or does it belong to the people we're in contract with?
Well, that's the analysis that would have to happen. What does your MO, or what does your contract say?
Looking at the contract.
And you would want to own that content and make sure that was clear with the third-party vendor. And then if you are uploading it to some public domain, then the students who are in them better not have opted out of wanting their images shared, because then we'll have to take those back, take them down. I don't know about the system and how it works, but we can look at it and figure out what makes the most sense.
There is data storage. I'm just looking at excerpts of the contract now, and there is the issue of schools shall be solely responsible for all content, security, and all releases and consent.
How is this any different whenever WRAL comes on a Friday night and takes video and shows it on the sports section of the news? How is this any, I mean...
We're responsible for it because we're signing the contract with the company, I
But
think.
The video images that television camera takes are being released as directory type information in the fact that they are a Wilson County school student.
So we as Wilson County Schools can't share information about our students unless we define it as directory information, or the law requires that we do.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
And WRAL is different. They're just the public reporting, and they should be going around and getting consent, but that doesn't happen in my experience.
Okay.
The point is, they don't have the same duty that Wilson County Schools does to protect the images and the information about our students.
So if they're taking the video and showing it,
Right.
it's on their back. But if
We can't
we were
control.
taking the video and sending it to them, then we would be under the guidelines if it wasn't in our directory
Correct.
information.
That's right. Yes.
They can do it because they're the news.
Yes.
But
But we have a
we
duty
can't
to
do it
them.
because we're the school. But the other thing about Pixelot, and this is just a tangential thought, is one of the reasons why they have this is not only just the live streaming of the games, but also to have the ability to take clips and cuts and do essentially what they've done, particularly in the football realm for the last decade, is students have the ability to cut and recut highlights or whatever and upload it to a system called Huddle, which allows them to go out and be recruited.
Yeah.
So rather than coaches or college coaches go out and have to physically sit at the game, they can just go to that player's Huddle site or Huddle page and see how that player performs.
And most student athletes want this to be the case, because it's promoting their skills, but to Mr. Breen's point, this helps get the word out. Huddle is one way. There's many different services that student athletes use to be visible. But unless they opt out of sharing of directory information, then this says that we will share all the videos we've taken.
I have a different question.
All right, Mrs. Barnes.
Okay, I know on line 208, it talked about in 209, students being allowed one free copy of the high school transcript. This goes back to cost. What is the cost factor incurred by the school system for producing some of these records. I don't know whether some of it will be online, or given to individuals online, or is it printed materials? So I just guess I have a question about the cost factor for some of it.
Ms. Barnes, it's my understanding that in the high school graduate's final report card, there is that final document. It's not official. That was one of the reasons that we did not add the word official. They're getting one free copy. It's not an official transcript.
So that last report card is
Yes.
that one.
That's
One
correct.
transcript.
Yes, and this was a part of, this is one of those policies that had been held over, and we were trying to, do we want to still continue with this practice? And so we added it into this section in student records.
Okay.
Well, when I read that,
So,
I assumed that I wasn't even thinking of the report card. I was thinking, I'm done. I want a copy of my transcript. I asked for it. So that's not how you're explaining that. What you're saying basically is, upon completion of the coursework or graduations, the student's final report card is considered their free transcript.
No, ma'am. It's in
No.
addition to their report card. When they receive their report card,
Yes,
the
sir.
final transcript
Okay.
will be a part of it, because the report card will only
Only have
share the
that- yes.
coursework of that one
Yes,
semester.
okay.
Yes, ma'am. It would be the whole entire high school transcript.
So
but-
I read that correctly.
Oh, yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
all
But
right.
it's not official.
Okay,
It's not from Scribbles. We did talk about that, because once they get into Scribbles, once the student has graduated and time has passed, the records have gone off to Scribbles. That's our storage system. Then there is a cost for students then.
so if I wanted a copy of my high school transcript from eons ago, that transcript is now stored in something called Scribbles,
Yes, ma'am.
and I still have to come to the school system and ask for a copy, and then you all retrieve it from Scribbles and present it to me at a cost.
You would actually request that from Scribbles, and there's I think there's a cost.
Does the public know that that's how they get?
Yeah, it's on our website. And matter of fact, we had one of our meetings where I was interrupted, and a gentleman was out here. He was requesting it, so he had the paperwork. Yeah, they do know that.
One of the most common questions I get from parents or people calling on the phone, not just parents, how do I get my high school transcript? And
Yeah.
how to go to your website.
Well, I hadn't requested a transcript in forever, so I had no need to look for
What-
that.
Gone back and added records from the past. There was a stoppage of time before I got here. Now we've gone back and caught back up and added records, and we're still catching back up. That is almost a multi daily question. We get all the time, but Scribbles hosts that for us, and so they can go directly to them. And part of the fee process pays for part of the hosting that the company provides. It's worked very well.
that provides me with the answer to the question that I
Yes.
was asking about the cost factor, because I've had people to call me and they needed information in order to be able to get a job.
Yeah.
And now that I know that Scribbles does have access, you know, I can lead them to that direction, and there is a cost association. That was what I was
On our
asking.
website, too.
It is.
So we just direct them to the website for that information, and they're looking for.
There are times occasionally, and we'll get once, twice, maybe 3 times a year, we'll get some that are just really different requests from way back, or it might have been an issue with the records at some point, but it's not the norm.
Yeah, because
And we do the legwork on that, to
Right.
try as best we can.
I
We've
have
gone
a
down low.
request that I presented to you all that had
Yeah.
come to me for somebody back in Art.
But that's much cleaner than it has been.
And it's very helpful when there are, like, when we have current high schools students who have graduated from the current high schools know exactly where to go to get their transcripts, if we didn't have scribbles. But it's those individuals who graduated many years ago when it's an elementary school now, but it was a high school.
Right.
So where are those records?
Right.
And so we're shipping those off to Scribbles so that it would all be housed in one place.
Okay.
Well, do we have a contract then, Dr. Wilson, with Scribbles? Is that how that works?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And it has been reviewed by the attorneys.
Yes.
Okay.
And Scribbles is also helping us with some other areas as
Before I
well.
get asked.
All right. Any other questions or issues in regard to policy 4700, student records?
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer?
I'm glad Mr. Breen brought up huddles, as certainly used by parents now as they send off highlights to different schools trying to get scholarships. And as I mentioned before, we need to go in with our eyes wide open with Pixel Lock. There are some questions that need to be answered there. But there's another situation we've not addressed, and I don't think probably needs to be addressed, but you need to know about it. For the last 75 years, starting with 16 millimeter film, conferences required teams that are going to play one another to give 2 reels of footage of the last 2 games they played to the opposing teams before Monday of the game Friday. So everybody would go down to Rains and Cox and they would wait for the games to be developed, and then they would meet the coaches there and they would give the last 2 games that they had films of, they would trade them. Of course, that upgraded to videotapes, and now I assume it's still the rule, if not the regulation in conferences, that you share the last 2 games that you played to the team that you're going to play this week. And I know in the conference that I was in, it was a fine if you did not, and it got to a situation where you had a video that was really good that you could take frame by frame and you could grade the players out on each play. And then there was a videotape that was really muffled and it was not very good and it was blurred. And sometimes you would send that tape to the team that you were playing next week, because they do base their offense and defense and plans for the coming week on those 2 tapes that they had gotten. This falls into the line of video images of students engaged in recognized activities in sports. I don't think anybody has ever held anybody's foot to the fire, any school foot to the fire, and I don't know the answer to that, but I do want y'all to know what happens every week in football.
Thank you very much. So there's a lot of information floating around in those video images that might be requested as part of the public directory, student directory. Okay, any other questions, comments, issues, concerns? Then we're going to move to Administrative Regulation 4700R, release of directory information. In that directory information, if we look at line 13, and you give the date and place of birth, why are we giving the place of birth? Is that just as part of the record, since students may come from some other place and come to us, and it's important to know where they were born? Or that's just the norm that usually occurs? So if I'm a student, you're going to tell not only my name, you're going to have a photograph or a digital image or video images, whatever, and you're gonna give my date and place of birth. My grade level, my attendance from 1967 to 1971 or whatever it is. But I just was wondering why the date and place of birth. More or less the place.
Yeah.
Right.
I can certainly understand the date when there are times, but I understand what you're asking about the place of birth,
Yeah.
as to why that would be, other than the origin of someone.
That's just a thought as you look at, since we don't get to, you get to look at that, and this is a regulation, and if you want to leave that there, all well and good. And under graduation certificates, graduation certificates are available only to students with disabilities, and the release of that information is confidential. But don't we have students now graduating with certificates in whether it's automotive or, they take the testing, and what's the? CTE. They take CTE courses, and many of them get certificates because we get presented in the spring of the year with the number of CTE certificates that have been granted and the like. On that information, cannot those CTE certificates be listed? It might mean whether I get a job or not. That's the thing above it.
On number 8, line,
So that's considered an endorsement.
Yes.
industry credential certifications
Okay.
and awards received.
Okay, so that's an endorsement on the
yeah.
diploma. So the graduation certificates are separate and apart and distinct for exceptional children,
Yeah.
possibly. Okay, all right. That clarification, I just misread. All right. Any other questions, issues, comments, concerns?
I have a question. This is the administrative reg for release of student director information. It sounds more or less. Is there one for release of director information for staff? Any policy?
No, FERPA regulates student records, and your state law regulates what is in the personnel records. And there
Okay.
are 12 elements of that law, 115C3, 20, that are public and open to inspection, and they include name, age, last promotion, demotion, justification for that, current salary. It's pretty specific, but those are the only elements of the personnel record that are considered open to the public's inspection.
And I remember those being spelled out in policy when we looked at that. But I could not remember that there was an administrative reg for that because of the stipulations that the state has.
I think it'd be best to keep that separate from the,
I do, but,
Lorraine.
yeah. I think you should separate, there's a whole different analysis for personnel records from student, and I think they should be separate.
yeah, covered.
I'm just going to make a fun point here as a point of privilege. I'm chronologically gifted, but I'm not 74 years old, as was stated when it talked about releasing director information. It was kind of, it had me listed in the
I saw
newspaper
that.
74.
I-
It's been 70 years.
I saw that. Send a correction to the
Chronologically
to the
gifted.
Mr. Freeman is
newspaper.
going to make a correction for me. I just thought it was kind of ironic. We were talking about date and age, and they had me. I'm chronologically gifted, but not 74.
Well, Ms. Barnes, to make it balance out, tell them to err in the opposite direction for your benefit,
There you go.
in the correction.
Chronologically gifted.
I like that, okay.
Kind of chronologically.
No other comments, issues, concerns. Let's move forward to draft policy 5220, collections and solicitations. Any questions, comments, issues, concerns, discussion? Hearing none. Let's move forward to policy 6510, equipment, materials, and supplies. Comments, questions, issues, concerns, discussion? Hearing none, let's move forward to revise policy 7240, drug-free and alcohol-free workplace. Comments, concerns, issues, discussion?
I think we should take out the CBD-related provisions.
What line, what number line is that, Mr.?
Says 75.
I wanted to say it out loud before we passed on.
What line did he say?
Line 75, he would like to have taken out the substance containing CBD or cannabis oil. Now, the THC one, tetrahydrocannabinol, you're not asking for that to be removed, are you?
No, that's still illegal.
Yes, okay. But just the CBD issue.
Yeah.
What about line 69, synthetic?
Synthetic cannabinoids are different than the CBD. Synthetic cannabinoids are a specific set of chemical formulas that the general statutes lay out.
Mr. Breen, do you know how to distinguish between CBD and THC? Because that's the issue that is currently facing the students.
Well, I think you have to be over the age of 18 to purchase CBD to begin with. I think it's easier to do on the student side, but
Workplace.
because what the students will argue is that the substance that they are burning is CBD and not THC. But CBD now, as it sits, is used in a whole host of completely legal products.
Yes.
I went to Gracie's Village Shops the other day and bought CBD cream.
Yes.
Yeah, I use it on my hands every night for arthritis, so.
I know the feel.
But I
And you
think
get-
there's definitely a way to distinguish between it for our employees versus our students.
Plus the smoking aspect, that would be illegal anyway.
Mhm.
I mean, on school campuses, you couldn't be smoking CBD. I mean, isn't that the form that you have difficulty discerning?
And gummies,
Well-
edibles, all kinds of stuff.
Right. You can't tell the concentration
Yeah.
of the THC in either one. That's the difficulty. You're basically going to need a blood analysis of every employee if you have an issue concerning whether they're under the influence and trying to work for the school system.
But CBD, the amount of CBD and what specific compound is contained within the edibles or whatever is strictly regulated already. No one's making unregulated CBD edibles without facing significant punishment from the state and federal government. And
Yeah.
while I understand that there's no, in the context of a drug test, which is why my wife refuses to use CBD anything, it's hard to distinguish, but I think that we're getting into a weird position when we start regulating the use of a non-impairing legal substance among our employees.
Well, when I read that, the influence of a substance, that sounds to be like a substance that is smoked, but it could be ingested because you have gummy bears with CBD. Capsules with CBD.
Would it be acceptable to the board if I work with who administers your drug test to find out what they can actually test for and how to discern between CBD and THC? Because
That's
if we have that ability through a drug test, I think you'll have more objective evidence about impairment versus non-controlled substance.
That works for me.
Yes, that works for me too.
Does that work, Mr. Booth?
Again, I mean, the entirety of the policy, employees are prohibited from possessing, using, selling, delivering, manufacturing, or being under the influence of CBD. And, you know, as a lot of folks have, people have a side hustle.
People have
Um,
what?
But they have a side hustle. They have something they do in addition to
Yes,
their main job.
yes.
And in the event that an employee is, I think we get into again, a sticky situation when we're in, not to try to be punny, but I think we're getting into an interesting situation when we try to limit the ability of somebody to sell a legal substance.
But when I first read this, I was wondering, you know, initially, why it didn't include our smoke-free, alcohol-free and stuff, but I, as I read it, I understood the separation of it, but at the same time, if it's the use of it, and it's used in a way that might violate the tobacco, alcohol, the policy, whatever the title of it is. But at the same time, Mr. Breen's point, well taken, that if they're selling it, they may be selling it as a clerk at a part-time clerk at a store that has that product. And I can understand it being separated from school and our students. Now, if they're selling it at school, that's a whole different thing and different policies apply, I think.
Well, I understand his point because the CBD does not have the hallucinogenic factor of marijuana, and you are specifically spelling out that they are prohibited from selling, because after cannabidiol it says, or tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the THC area. So what I hear Mr. Breen saying is that if you're using, selling, delivering, manufacturing, or being under the influence of the THC factor and influence of a substance containing the THC factor, as opposed to just the CBD, which is not inclusive of the THC factor. And I understand his point of side hustles and persons, self included, who sell products that have CBD.
This one's also
That has been
possessing.
regulated and gone through laboratories that certify that there's no hallucinogenic THC factor within the product.
This one also says possessing, so if you got your hand cream in your bag,
I'm possessing.
That was,
And
I
that's-
had the same thing.
and that's-
marked.
that's-
Beverly's
put you in
gonna drop a
violation.
dime for possession over there with her CBD cream.
She probably bought it at that house. I
Yeah,
think.
bought
I
it.
actually bought it at Farmer's Market.
Farmer's Market, yeah. I mean, so
Which is
that's,
known for its illicit substance.
Oh,
That's a joke. That is a joke.
Mr. Breen, I
The
see
Wilson
a,
Farmer and Artisans Market does not sell any illicit substance.
I see a sting operation in the developing stages here.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, just possessing it
It-
is, I mean, based on this, you'd have some problems. And I mean, you can't walk into any store right now, it's like I said, Gracie's and everything else without
Right.
products, hand creams and
Yes.
lip balm, everything else.
I have a lip balm
Yeah.
in my purse.
We got hand sanitizer at the office at CBD hand sanitizer.
Yeah, let's don't go. So,
Can we agree with Ms. Cornetta to work with our drug screener and just kind of bring this back after we get some more details?
Well, I think she can do that, but I think the argument is just the commercially produced product that has CBD content is being punishable to be in violation of policy when it is not the THC substance.
So just a matter of changing wording then?
I think it was looking for a removal of CBD.
That's what I hear.
Okay.
but your concern, Katie, is one you've seen from other cases where some of the behaviors folks would exhibit while under the influence of that
Under the
legal
mis-
product may be
under the-
misleading from an employee.
Under the mistaken impression that the CBD,
That's a lot of hand cream, man.
It's a lot. I
That's
mean,
a lot of lip balm.
obviously, any substance, whether legal or illegal, that puts them under an influence that they can't properly supervise and care for the students is an issue for the board and a liability. But I think the policy could be altered to remove CBD as a prohibited substance, and maybe we can address it as long as CBD is legal, the possession of it and the use of it without being under the influence, to compromise student safety is acceptable. I mean, it's walking a fine line, but I do still want to know what the drug tests show for the.
One question I've had asked is about DOT and bus license
Right,
issues with that
right.
for employees.
Right, and that's another good follow-up point.
But I have been asked that one, so is there an issue with them in bus license?
for using a cannabinoid.
If they were using that product and they get pulled for the test, then
That sounds like a fist fight between the driver and DMV. And
I
not
mean,
necessarily a fist fight for us.
Right, it may be a
no,
regulation
but
that we
I'm
don't.
just saying, related to that, I've heard the same thing. No, I agree, that's their set of rules.
So what is your pleasure?
I think it might be both if CBD is not included in the policy, then I think that we need to make sure that that can be distinguished in the test that may be given, so someone can't say, yes, it's CBD, when in fact it may be
THC.
THC.
The chronic.
If they can speak clearly when they're explaining it.
Well, when this comes back to us, Ms. Cornetta, if you have found a question to your answer in relation to the drug testing, and bring that back to us as well, since this is a first read,
Absolutely.
with an alternate that does not include the CBD component that's there.
Is
Yeah.
it possible for the board for me to have more than just 6 days to get the information? Because I also want to check in DMV as well and give you sort of the 360 of CBD and what currently is.
Members of the board, do you want this to be pulled to give her more time in relation to her inquiry with DOT and the testing entity that is used?
That's what I was suggesting.
And with a possible alternative that would remove that questionable CBD issue?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Mr. Breen, does that satisfy you, Mrs. Boyette, Mr. Mercer?
It
Yes,
does
ma'am.
me.
Okay, they're in consultation, Dr. Wilson and Mrs. Cornetta. So we'll let them, I don't know if they really had a chance to hear the comment and the agreement that was board consensus or not. So in answer to your inquiry, yes, we might pull this policy, to allow you an opportunity to have more than 6 days to make contact with DOT and the testing entity, and to be able to bring back with the removal of the CBD if that is what's necessary. If by chance you're able to have that conversation with DOT, the testing entity, and can craft that alternate that removes CBD within the 6 days, we'll be happy to have that come back to us at next.
It's absolutely my
meeting.
goal, but I want to be thorough because this is not something you want to be unclear about in your policy.
Okay.
So
So if this comes back, we'll be good to go with it for second read with the necessary corrections and any discussion. And if not, then you will not see that particular policy on Monday's agenda. All right? Any other questions, issues, concerns regarding policy 7240, drug-free and alcohol-free workplace?
I was going to ask Ms. Boyd, my hands are really dry and understanding that hand cream. Or
I did not
here's
bring
something-
it with me, I'm sorry. It's night.
She just didn't want to share it. She said, she said your hands,
I couldn't resist, I'm sorry.
She
It's
said
very
your
important.
hands-
Quarter of the bucket size.
she said your hands might get
Yeah.
impaired.
I take full responsibility, I'm sorry.
All right, moving forward to policy 7560, permitted salary deductions for absences and discipline of certain exempt employees. Any questions, comments, concerns, issues, or discussion? Hearing none. Let's move forward to policy 7620, payroll deductions. Questions, issues, comments, concerns, discussion? Hearing none. Let's move forward to policy 8330, signatures. Questions, issues, comments, concerns, discussion? Hearing none. Let's move forward to policy, revised policy 8340, insurance. And I have a question in regard to lines 3, 4. And my question was, do we need to specifically include the automotive and in the marine and cyber protection? We've talked about having a rider on with one of the carriers in regard to the cyber protection. Do we need is that, if I remember, it gave us some limited coverage in terms of cyber security, but do we need to have specific cyber security and the automotive and marine? Because you have boiler and machinery, you have auto liability. I just didn't know if we needed to be specific about a cyber policy and the like.
We didn't add the cyber when I went back and checked. We looked at it for the cost of issues of it. But if you wanted to put that in there, it's about recommendations versus what we're actually carrying. So you could put that in there for coverage.
And the list is not exhaustive, it just says such as,
Yes. But in this day of cyber anything, I don't want anybody to think that we're not having coverage
Hadn't had
for
the
that.
well, just not, you've had the conversation about it.
We've had conversation,
Yeah,
but
that would be, if you want to put it, I don't have a problem with adding it in there, it's up to the
if you were
board.
gonna put anything in there, that's the one I'd put.
Yeah, that's the only one that wouldn't be generally understood.
okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the last policy,
Don't say it.
other than the couple that are coming up in January and any slight revisions, adaptables, whatever. Is revised policy 9,000, planning to address facility needs. Any issues, comments, questions, concerns, discussions? Give yourself, oh. Who was that started to, Mrs. Barnes?
This is Velma. I was gonna ask you, are we gonna have a going away party for all the removed policy and a new draft policy party for those that we've just repaired and revised?
Are we gonna have a party? Yeah, we're gonna, in
A
just,
going away party and a welcome aboard party for the new policy.
in just a few minutes, we're gonna adjourn the meeting, and that will be the celebration that there is. You all will know that we don't have any more of these extra Mondays right now. We have, for the last year, had all of these extra meetings in regard to policies, and we thank you, as I stated at the beginning of the meeting. So, if there is nothing else to claim our attention, the chair will...
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Farmer.
I move for adjournment.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Farmer, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Please record your vote, Mrs. Boyette. Mr. Breen. Mr. Farmer.
Yahoo!
Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Powell.
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes.
Aye.
Myself, Dr. Fitch, aye. And I did hear your response as an aye, Mr. Mercer.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. We are now adjourned. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cut me off.
What is it?
Cut to me, shut everything down? You got it though, don't you?
So I can officially
Is-
take that November and December policy meeting out of my calendar.
Fix it.
November, yes, ma'am.
November 2nd and December the 7th.
Yes, ma'am. Because those next policies will be at our regular January board meeting.
Now, what are we gonna do to the new District 6 person to get them all hazed and jumped in? Because I just spent 2
You got any more
years
funds in?
doing these
Fix the
policies,
system
and
up.
I feel like they need to be.
So we need to find 6
We
more
still have a
$100.
few that we need to repeal. from
But
the
he's
old-
talking about all this mass.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was just the luck of the draw, Mr. Breen.
Just think about how much you borrowed.
I've learned so much.
I mean, I need to see.
It was the luck of the draw, the timing of when you came on the board.
Guy at Parker Stone said they'll come back.
This was my third go at revising policy in all these years. That's why we did this, because they were so